Hi and welcome. Today I want to discuss the basics of creating any UI interaction is buttons. So TouchDesigner out of the box has a couple of options. One is the basic button. If you double click, you go to over to comp and you click on button. And it's not pretty. You can change the size. You can go inside of it and change the word on it, to, my button or whatever you want to call it, start. And then when you also have the option of what kind of button is it, a toggle, a momentary, usually momentary. And then you connect that up to execute some code. And that is the basics of any button. And from there, you can connect it to, usually you'll go to a chop execute, and you'll set an off to on, and then you'll write just a little bit of code, and we're just going to type in here a print statement, print button clicked. And we go off of that, and now if I bring up the console, whenever you click on it, button clicked. That's the basics, but most people aren't going to use this button. This button is great for prototypes. It's great for making something in a test interface. But when I talk about UI interfaces, from my point of view, I'm usually talking about something that a visitor would see in a museum or some type of sporting event or any type of place where you have a high-end interactive exhibit. A lot of people that use this kind of button or the next button I'll talk about are doing it for their own benefit, building their own interfaces, and they just want to quickly turn something on or off. The other type of button that you can do is in the palette. It is under the widgets system, and down here we have different types of buttons, but we'll just use a momentary button. It does really the same thing, except widgets are, you use widgets together, and you're able to build an interface using a lot of nice widgets, but widgets I find to be more of an administrative interface or a settings panel. It's again meant for the artist or the musician to create something that allows them to have control over what they're doing. And again, I'll just kind of press it, and you can see that I've stringed this up to the null again and out to the chop, and we're getting our click action. So these are both working as buttons, but again, these are not something that you're going to use in an end product that would be seen again in a museum type thing. So I would like to show you how you go about making your own buttons. Now you could go inside this network and you could change it here. You could just take out this text, add your own box, your own graphics, and that would be one way. But usually the simplest approach, and the one I use the most, is you just make a container. You make a new container, going to chop, to container, and then you make a box or something inside of it. So very simply, we'll do a rectangle under the tops, and then we'll change that. Now, to make this, I want to get into kind of how to make custom buttons, make them reusable, how to add parameters to them. So we'll go ahead and kind of start that here. So step one is let's make this button the same size as its parent. With a little bit of Python code, we type in me.parent.width in the resolution for the width, and we do the same thing for height. And that way, whenever we resize the button container up top, it will resize this. So, and then I'm going to make the rectangle take up the entire box. And then I'm going to make that into a text. So I just right click, and I was able to pick a new thing. And I picked text here, and what I want to do now is I want to go down to output in this tab, and we want to overlay. Now, because they're both white, you're not going to be able to see it, so we go over to the color tab. For now, let's change that to black, and let's make that a little more bold and bigger. You can choose different fonts, whatever you want to do. And we also might want to do a Autofit if too large, just in case our text gets too big, it shrinks down automatically. So then we want to output that into a null. And let's go up and see how that reacts. So we ended in null 1. We might want to call that out 1 or something like that. And then we go up here to the container again. We click on the look tab. We tell it to look inside itself. So // is kind of inside, and then out 1. So now it is pulling up this as the look of this container. We might call this button 1, if I could type. Button 1. Okay, but it's not a button yet. It's just a panel. Or just a container. How do we make this work like the other buttons? Well, you go inside here, you go to chops, you add a panel. And a panel is able to gather information about what's happening to wherever you assign it. So currently this panel is, because it's not attached and I dropped it in, it's looking at its parent, which is the container that we're inside of. And I'm wanting to route that out to a chop out. So we go to out, and it will pass along any signal that we pass to it. Now, we don't want to pass all the signals. We just want the select, which is an indication that that something has happened with a click. So we now just have the select. So if I go out here and I plug this into the null again, and I click this little X here so we can use it as a button, you see that now we have clickety click. We have a button. If I go back to our console, you can see that it is actively working as a button. Okay, well, that's an ugly button. How do we make it prettier? Well, this is, of course, up to you and up to the artist or whoever you're working with. Typically, in a large project, you're not doing everything. You're working either as the programmer or the interactive developer, and most times an agency or your art department is going to hand you the assets. But for right now, I just wanted to show you the basics of making your own button. So as I showed you before, we had made it feed off the parent stuff here, parameters. So if I make it wider, 600 by 150, now we get more of a button size type thing. Okay, but let's say we want to make a menu of buttons. How do we... I don't want to have to go through and create a new button and go through and type everything each time and drill down and change all this stuff. How can we make this more dynamic? How can we make this reusable? So in order to do that, we need to customize it. So we can right click, we can go to customize the component, and we can add some features here. So let's just go ahead and call this label. And we choose from the drop down here a string, string, str. Click add, and you can close it. And now, if you click on this panel, you now have an extra tab called custom, and this is label. So we might call this start. Okay, now we need to link that up inside. So we go in here, we double click. We go to the DAT channel here, and we look for parameters. So parameters come in here, and you can see that our custom parameter showed up here. So it is, label is the name of the parameter, and the value is start. So we need to reference that in our text over here. So we click where we have text, and we give it a little bit of Python code. And we say OP, it's the operator. And we give it the name of the operator. In this case, it's parameter. 1. Then we have to give it tell it where in that parameter table to find it. We're in row 1, column 1. You can also use the labels at the top. So you could say row 1 and then comma, and then you could tell it, give me the value. You could also just do 1. It's just, there's different ways of doing it. And if you see it come up here as just text, like obviously that's not what we want, you click on this right here to make it run as an expression. And once I did that, you can see the output is start. So if I go up now and I change this to home, my button is now home. Okay, so let's make multiple buttons here. I'm just going to copy paste, and we might make this one about, and we might make this one shop. It's kind of going off website type stuff. This one might be support. So that's how we have now made multiple buttons, and we could replicate these, connect these up, give them some different actions to create that, to make this actually work. Now, the other thing to think about when you're doing UIs for exhibits, which is primarily what I do, okay, do you need a rollover state? Most interaction that you would have in those scenarios is not driven by a mouse. Usually in a museum environment, we're dealing with touchscreens. So you don't really have to worry about an overstate, but you might want to have a active state. You've pressed down on it, or it's now the current button type situation. So we could add more custom parameters to this and add some different stuff in the background. So what I'm going to do right now, I've made a menu of items here, and I'm going to continue to edit these, but I don't have to go back and edit each one of these as I kind of do my development. So I can select the bottom 3 here, go to common, and clone master. This will make it clone whatever I give it as the target master here. So as I make changes to this top button 1, the others will reflect it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into customize component. I'm going to add a new variable called active and add that, and that's going to be a bool or an integer. Let's see. Let's just, I think there's a switch to toggle. Let's do a toggle, which, 1 or 0 essentially. So we're going to add that. And now we have an active on off to respond to. So if we go in here, we have the active showing up in the parameter there, but usually when you do parameters with kind of toggle or various numbers or integers, there's another way of getting your parameter through the chop parameter. And that makes it just real easy to link it up to what I'm going to do next. So let's say we want to change the color if it's the active button. So we want to add a switch. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to duplicate the rectangle. I'm going to add a switch. It needs to be a top switch. And we're then going to feed that into the home, or our text, not home, but what currently says home. And I'm going to change the background of the second one to a different color. So let's change that to the color. Let's make it, let's make it orange. So we now have this switch and we now have this parameter for active coming in. So if I hit the plus sign here so I can drag the variable for active, I can drag it up to the index. And that's going to switch between 0 and 1, which will change between these two objects in the switch. So if I back out here and now click active, that button now turns orange. And that'll go for any of these others because I've got them cloned, or to the master. All the updates are going to happen to those two. It's just really great during development to have that connected, so that you don't have to go through and do tedious replication. So now that we've got multiple buttons, we need, if we back out here and look at our actual display, where are they? They're all stacked here, and that's just because they haven't been laid out correctly. Now, what you would normally do is probably put these into another container, a parent container that we might call the menu. And then we grab all these and we pull the top here, the hierarchical link here, and we plug that in. And then we go to the menu and we go to children and we tell it to align top to bottom. And that will give us a stack of stuff. Now, right now, these are too tall. I've made these oversized. So I'm going to go in here to the layout. I'm going to resize them to, let's say, 250 by 75. And or let's go 300 maybe. And that font is huge. We'll go in and change that font right quick. Home font, change it back to maybe 30. Go back to our parent menu. We'll make it taller. We'll use the parent height of the. A lot of times you'll want to use references to other containers just so that everything is scalable. So we'll go me.parent.height. That'll make it nice and tall. Then we go to children. We change our line top to bottom. And now they're all stacked like a menu. And we might adjust our spacing a little bit. And we might also make sure that our order is how we want them. Now, a lot of times they'll follow the order. If you've got 1, 2, 3 in your labels, that's one way of doing it by default. Sometimes that's not what you want, especially if you name them after what the buttons are alphabetically. They wouldn't be in the same order. So you can also go down to the align order down here, and you can tell something to be in a different order. So I can say I want this to be number 1, and I want this to be number 3, or whatever I want to do that. And that will realign them differently. So if you need to resort them in any certain way, you can use that align parameter to do that. So that is how you make a custom button and put it into a menu. That's the very basics of creating a interactive button interface type thing. Just real quick, let's go ahead and make it a little prettier, because right now we're just kind of using these boxes. And I've gone ahead and just really quickly brought in some PNG files. So what we're going to do here is swap these as the containers. So we'll remove these rectangles as our background. We'll plug that in as item 1, item 2 there in our switch. And now if we go back out here, it's a little prettier. We go to custom, action, active, on, off. And that's, graphically, that's how you make a graphic button, okay? It's going to take coding to actually make these usable, but we'll cover that in a future lesson. I just want to cover the basics of how to make custom buttons, what my approach is. Again, it's very straightforward. You're just going to add a panel. That's what's going to give you your interactive data of clicking on it. That'll work for both a normal mouse click or a touchscreen click, and that's the basics of making a button. There is one other way of making a button, getting into multi-touch. You'll want to use a render pick, which is a different method I think we should probably cover in a completely separate video. So again, you've got your default button, which is under comps, great for prototyping, rapid type development. You've got your widget button, and then you've got how to make a custom button. I hope that was useful, and we'll continue to build upon this, and then I would like to get to a place where we build out kind of a mock-up project just to show you the entire workflow of creating an interface, connecting it to via scripting to manage content. So that is the goal for me, to get to a place where we're building out an entire UI. So I hope this has been helpful.